Stop that. Yeah, I hear him chat to the noise. They stop for the talking. I hear him chat with the boys. Those nights keep walking. Yeah, hot like fire on the pan. If you want to touch now, please use caution.
Okay, so we've arrived in Arundel, which is a really nice little village in West Sussex in England. And today I'm actually filming on the Insta360 One RS, which is a relatively new 360 camera from Insta360. It's obviously the upgrade to the One R. It's the same modular sort of format, but they've upgraded a few things, and that's what we're going to go through in this video. And also I'm going to give my opinion on whether I think it's worth buying this thing. Full disclosure, Insta360 did send me this camera to review, but if you've watched videos on this channel before, you'll know that I don't hold back even when companies send me stuff to review. If you've arrived at this video, you already know the Insta360 One RS is an upgrade from the Insta360 One R. The idea of it is it's a modular action camera so that one brain or core module can control lots of different camera modules. So you've got action cameras and 1-inch cameras, you've got 360 cameras, and this is all controlled from one brain, so you don't need to have multiple different cameras. So right now we're filming in 4K at 25 frames per second, which is actually on the 4K boost lens, which is actually the recommended settings from Insta360, what they sent me. So just let me know what you think it looks like. We're going to land the drone now and we're going to go on a little adventure and get some shots on the way. So why is it called Insta360 One RS, and what's different between this and the original Insta360 One R? Well, the main thing that's different is they've upgraded the core module, and essentially what they've done is they've upgraded the processor on it, so it should be a lot quicker and should be able to handle bigger tasks, things like HDR and just generally the speed of navigating the interface. The next thing they've updated is the sort of action camera module. This is the 4K boost module, and they've increased the sensor size, so it's now a 1/2-inch sensor, and it's 48 megapixels as well, so you should get higher resolution photos. The bigger sensor size should mean this is better in low light and also increased dynamic range as well. So this is a big upgrade from the action camera module they had before. And the last thing they've updated is the battery module. It's actually slightly bigger in size, but they've also increased the size of the actual battery, so the whole thing should last a bit longer. And the good thing is if you've got the old Insta360 One R or any of those modules, they're interchangeable as well, so you can use the old battery with the new modules. The only thing is if you're using a new core module, they do recommend using the new battery because obviously it's going to make it last a bit longer. Whether you're a fan of this modular design is definitely a case of personal preference. Personally, I think it's an awesome innovation. In theory, you just get lots of battery modules, you keep your core module, and then you just keep upgrading the camera module, so you don't have to buy a new camera every single time. This reduces that landfill waste and things like that, so it feels a lot more eco-friendly, but it also means you're not buying a new camera every year. Every time the new version comes out, all you have to really do is buy the new camera module. So obviously this relies on Insta360 continuing to support this type of camera, but I think in releasing this Insta360 One RS, the new core module, and some of the new modules, they're definitely proving that they are all in on this. The obvious disadvantage being that if you only have one core module, you can only use one of the lenses at a time. So if you're someone who wants a 360 camera in one hand and an action camera in the other, it's not going to work. Still though, it's fairly easy and quick to swap between them. There's a small touchscreen on the core module, and if I'm quite honest, this is too small. It's pretty responsive and does the trick, but on a camera this size, they need to come up with a way to make that screen a bit bigger. The bezels are quite big, and having seen the X3, I'm sure they can come up with a way to make that screen size a bit better. Also, I know these days we're kind of spoiled, but it really frustrates me that there's no way to have a screen on the back and on the front at the same time. So obviously when you're vlogging, sometimes you want to be pointing at yourself, then you want to turn it around and face something else, but you can only have the screen on one side at a time. So for example, if I'm vlogging like this, I can just take off the battery module, turn this module around, so it's facing the same way. So the screen is facing the same way as the lens, put the battery module back on, and I've got a little vlogging set up there. So I'm vlogging like this, and then I turn it around and suddenly there's no screen on the back, so I can't see what I'm actually filming. So the next generation of this, in my opinion, really needs to have the option to have a screen on the front and the back. Even if they end up putting it on the 4K boost lens, I think that'd be really worth it. So on top of all that modularity, you've also got all the accessories you can actually get for this. That includes the microphone adapter, which connects to the USB socket in here, and is actually what's allowing me to attach my DJI mic and record sound from the DJI mic straight onto the Insta360 camera. And also the hot shoe adapter up here, which is allowing me to connect the receiver from the DJI mic up onto the top of the case here. You can also obviously get that invisible selfie stick, which is best for use with the 360 mod, just because the 360 mod will actually sort of cut out that selfie stick and make it look like it's not there, so you get those really cool like following sort of drone-like shots. Insta360 also sent me over a bike mount too, which I've been using, and I think all of these accessories are core accessories that you should get if you've got this camera. So let's get onto that new 4K boost lens, and for the most part I'm impressed with this. I love that you can go ultra wide with this lens, but using the zoom features on the camera you can also have a more natural point of view if you didn't want that action camera look. So this lens will give you up to 4K at 60 frames per second, which gives you a little bit of room to slow down the footage in post and get some really cool B-roll footage. Although their recommended settings are 4K 25, it's obviously going to perform a little bit better in low light. The dynamic range is also excellent on this camera, even without the HDR mode on, which we'll get into in a minute. Even in harsh sunlight, the camera managed to expose for the shadows on my face without blowing out the sky, so huge thumbs up for the dynamic range. Insta360 has their own stabilisation algorithm called flow state, and it is really good on this 4K boost lens. If you're trying to do like smooth B-roll, it can sometimes fight you a bit, but in general that's not really too noticeable, and it's a really good stabilisation algorithm. But obviously action is what this stabilisation is designed for, and I put it for its paces on a really bumpy mountain bike trail. When I was watching the camera when I was biking, I was bumping up and down like this, and I was like, I'm never going to get any usable footage from this. But surprisingly, it looks really, really good. Now, obviously you can actually see the stabilisation working. It's not perfect, you still see some jitters, but I actually think this is probably better than having like a floating look, because when you're watching it back, you really want to feel those bumps still. It's not all plain sailing though. Lens flares can be a bit of an issue and really distracting considering the stabilisation is doing its work and the lens flares are kind of floating around in the corner of the frame. And also you'll notice this footage is incredibly over sharpened. Now this is how it comes straight out of camera, but I don't think it should be like this straight out of camera. I don't think people should have to change it so the sharpening is a bit lower. I do think this is a little bit over the top. Luckily there is something in the menu that enables you to reduce that sharpness level, so I recommend going to somewhere between low or medium sharpness, whereas the default is actually very high, as you can see here. So another mode which I actually think is underrated on these cameras is photo modes. Now back in the day it wasn't really worth taking photos on an action camera. They weren't very good, you might as well use your phone. But in the age of like front screens and much better sensors, I actually think it might be worth taking photos on action cameras now. And the 4K boost module takes up to 48 megapixel photos, and I think they look great. The color rendition is great, they're nice and vibrant. I think the sharpness is kind of on point with that. And any photo from this camera is going to be great for social media, and that's all you can want from a camera like this. There's also this new 6K widescreen mode, which doesn't give you the same aspect ratio as the normal 4K modes, but it does look really good quality in practice. I haven't had much of a chance to use it, but I can tell you that I really like the quality out of this 6K mode. They haven't changed the 360 lens though, they've kept that exactly the same, so it's the same one you get with the Insta360 One R, still films in 5.7K. I'm currently vlogging with this with the invisible selfie stick as well, so it should be cutting out the stick, but the problem is because it's on the end of the stick, if you even slightly move it, that will probably be getting the stick in here, so you have to kind of make sure that the camera is nice and straight in order to cut that stick out. In fact, if you're buying the Twin Edition where you get the 4K boost lens and the 360 module, you're actually getting Insta360's worst 360 camera here, because they've now got their X3, which has a 1/2 inch sensor, and they've got the 1 inch 360 mod available as well. But that doesn't mean it's a bad camera. In fact, the 360 module is still one of the best reasons to get this camera. There's still no other brand that makes 360 as good and as easy as Insta360 does. The invisible selfie stick just makes for some really interesting and unique shots, and its Studio app makes it as easy as possible to reframe everything after the fact. On top of that, the flow state stabilisation I just mentioned works even better in 360, so you get some real smooth shots. The footage can be quite noisy at times, and once you've zoomed in and exported it from the app or the studio, it doesn't look perfect, but the fact you can now upgrade to a 1 inch sensor makes this one the sort of entry-level version, and I think that's reasonable. So this little 360 mod becomes a lot of fun to use, and I think it's a really nice little entry-level way to get into 360 video. And if you find yourself using it a lot, you can always upgrade to that 1 inch sensor. But I would like it if they released somewhat of an in-between, so that 1/2 inch sensor on the X3, if they could put it into a module like this for the One RS, then that'd be ideal. There's also some extra features and modes that are worth shouting about here, and in my opinion one of the best of these is HDR video. So Insta360 is marketing this as one of the only action cameras that has a HDR feature specifically for action, so the flow state stabilisation still works in this mode. Now obviously HDR is great for moments like these when you're, for example, in a car. You've got the inside of the car which is slightly darker in exposure, and outside is really bright. Normal cameras would really struggle with this, but the HDR feature on the Insta360 handles it really well. As mentioned earlier, the dynamic range from these modules, specifically the 4K boost module, is really good as it is. But the fact you can now use HDR and still use the flow state image stabilisation just makes it a lot more usable in some harsh conditions. Bear in mind though that because it's still a small sensor, you're still going to get a little bit of noise in the shadows, so just be a bit wary of that. There's also star lapse and time lapse features, which are great for recording over a long period of time and speeding up. But we've seen these features in Insta360 cameras before. You might have also noticed that the microphone quality on this new version has been improved. There's a couple of new microphones, and in the included case there's a little wind muff that goes above the microphones to keep any wind noise out. Generally for an action camera, I found the sound quality on this to be really good, but you should definitely use an external mic where possible. One of the areas Insta360 shines is their app. It's just such a simple and easy experience, from transferring stuff from the camera to the app to editing 360 video. The app is so simple that anyone who's not picked up a 360 camera before can just get straight into editing 360 footage. Transferring from the app though is good for social media, but it doesn't actually give you the full quality of footage. So you're going to want to be doing all of that in the Insta360 Studio app for Mac and PC. The Insta360 Studio, in my opinion, is actually one of the selling points of this camera. It just makes it so easy for anyone to pick up 360 footage, go into the Insta360 Studio, edit it, you can add keyframes, move the camera around, you can track certain parts of the image, you can speed things up, and it just makes 360 footage so accessible in a way no other brand is doing right now. Overall, this camera, and more importantly this concept, is the way forward in my opinion, and I think Insta360 have done an amazing job implementing it. So there's definitely some things you should consider before buying an Insta360 One RS. The first of those is that over sharpening. You can turn that down in settings, and you probably should, but you need to watch out for that because once it's there, it's baked in and you can't get rid of it. So definitely turn that down in settings if you do get this camera. The second thing is that small screen. It's actually really easy to use, but it is quite fiddly at times. And if you're sort of in the middle of an action environment, like a really freezing cold mountain or something like that, or you've got gloves on, it's going to be pretty much impossible to use this screen. I know Insta360 will find a way to make it bigger in future iterations, but at the moment it's still a really small screen. And then there's the fact there's only one of these screens. So if you've got the 4K boost mod on and you're trying to vlog yourself, and then you want to turn your camera around to film something else, it's really difficult to actually do that. But you know what, none of that really matters because the versatility of this camera is pretty much infinite. You can just keep one core module and keep upgrading your camera modules as you go along. You can create a collection of these battery modules which are really easy to take off and put back on. And there's so many different accessories which just make this camera even more versatile. If you wanted, you could just start with the standard action camera, the core module and the 4K boost module, which makes it a lot cheaper. And then you could add the 360 mod on later, and then maybe you've mastered the 360 and you want to move on to the 1-inch 360 mod. And before you know it, you've just got a whole ecosystem there. Perhaps you're someone that wants an action camera, or you're someone that wants a 360 camera. Or perhaps you want both, but you haven't got the finances to fork out for both cameras. Well, for those people, providing you know what you're getting into with the modularity, I think this is a great choice and an easy purchase.